Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
In John chapter 19, last week we finished that, but we're going to look at verses, we said verse 38 through 42 as an introduction. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. He came therefore and took the body of Jesus. And there came also Nicodemus, which at first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes about 100 pound weight. Then took they the body of Jesus and wound it in linen clothes with spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. Now the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new sepulchre wherein was never man yet laid. There laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. Perhaps, again, Joseph and Nicodemus, all the way back in John 3, that discussion Jesus had at the beginning of his ministry with Nicodemus, when Nicodemus said, "We know." Who all we at that time was, we don't really know, but we're called again to think about whether Joseph of Arimathea at that time was one of those who was considering the things that Jesus was doing. Sadly, for especially the religious leaders, those who believed in Jesus and wanted to trust in him as the Messiah, were afraid to do so publicly because they were afraid of what might happen to them. And after all, they were in the little hidey-hole meetings, as we call them, and they knew that they were plotting to put Jesus to death. And they realized just how serious that those in the opposition was. And so they kept to themselves. And apparently Joseph and Nicodemus were working together in this process. It was Joseph of Arimathea who came and requested of Pilate that he be given the body. As we said, normally there would have been graves dug there somewhere close by. Not too many people claim the bodies of thieves, and so many times, again, they had to dig the graves, the burial detail. And so Joseph, rather than seeing him buried as many were, asked Pilate for the body, and that apparently seems not necessary to be an exception to the rule necessarily, but again, most people, once something like that's happened there, they just weren't that interested. But of course, Joseph, Nicodemus was with him, and so they took the body of Jesus and they put it, as we see from Matthew 27, we're told that there was this sepulcher, this tomb, newly hewn. Never a man or person had been laid in there. And it's there that they placed Jesus and rolled a stone over it in order to facilitate a burial, and seeing this was a day of preparation, the Passover was coming upon them, and so they wanted to, before the sun set, have Jesus buried. And so as we look at this, we need to understand, as I've said before, part of the writings of these individuals that we see, one of the important things to remember is that the Holy Spirit was bringing to their remembrance the things that they had seen and heard. And so if you hadn't seen it and you hadn't heard it, you can't remember it. And so things that people said that you heard, things that people said they saw that you heard them talking about, all of these things can be brought back to your remembrance. As well as many times we're focused on something specifically. There may be many things going on around us, but one of the things about a human is we can focus on one particular thing, even though a lot of other things are going on. And so sometimes we are concerned, maybe a certain individual, a certain person does something that gains our attention, and so we're focused on that while somebody else may be focused on something completely different. And so while seeing the same thing, their perspectives are a little bit different. And so when we look at the scriptures, we're a lot of times people say, well, you know, there was this and there was that, and they didn't talk about this and they didn't talk about that. Again, there are various things that they're focused on. Some people didn't see it. Some people didn't hear about it. So if they didn't see it and they didn't hear about it and they weren't there, then it's kind of hard to write about it. And so, especially with the Gospels, we're talking about the perspective more than anything else of the individual and how they viewed Jesus. We're getting 4 individual things. And so when people say, well, why didn't John do this? Why didn't John do that? Well, again, if it's over there somewhere else, then it's already been done. We have to remember John is writing a letter here where a large portion of what he writes is not found in the other 3 Gospels. And so it was not his intention to just write another gospel and rehash a lot of the things that had already been said. Matthew, Mark, Luke had already probably written theirs, and the 3 of those together made up what at that time was again becoming a tradition among the people of God as they understood that. And so John is more focused on specific things, such as Joseph of Arimathea requesting the body of Jesus, and that Nicodemus was there. Perhaps, and it's only a guess, but perhaps while John at the beginning didn't say that Joseph of Arimathea was one of the we, maybe this is his way of getting us to consider that Joseph of Arimathea may very well have been in the we, and how Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were working together at this time. And of course, we don't know others. There probably were other leaders that were believing, but these 2 had at least enough devotion to Jesus to make sure that he was buried that evening. And the situation was, few people, as we said, few people would have even attempted to do anything with the body of Jesus, because technically handling a dead body makes you ceremonially unclean. And so even though it was a day of preparation, if he wasn't, by sunset, if he wasn't buried, then burying him could have been seen by some as work. And so since the Passover was considered a Sabbath, then the Sabbath rules applied. And so there's a reason why they need to get this done. So they risk becoming ceremonially unclean in burying Jesus so that he wouldn't end up getting thrown in a hole. And if he wasn't buried, again, depending on what day this is, it would have been at least another day. That where would you do with the body? Where would you put it? And of course, the Romans, if nobody's going to take it, we're just going to throw it in that hole and bury it. So there's a lot of things going on there. They didn't want to be guilty of work, and some would have accused them of, why would you be, not only are you defiling yourself, but you're working on the Sabbath, if it went in to that. So that gives us some insight into the death and the burial of Jesus. It tells us here that no one had ever been placed there before. And we have previously discussed the burial practices of the Jews, at least the more well-off who had the opportunity to have a place of burial as a sepulcher or a tomb. And so normally inside the tomb there was a bench, what we kind of think of as a bench, that the body could be laid on, and it was wrapped in the spices and the grave cloths and all of that, and the stone was usually rolled away. And then usually, again, if there wasn't another burial, on the anniversary of their death, somewhere around there about a year later, they would go back into the sepulcher. By that time, the body would have decomposed, and all that would usually be left was the bones. And they would take the bones and put them in what are called ossuary boxes. And so today people are cremated and they put them in an urn. The ashes, not really ashes, but it's the bones have been ground up, calcified. There isn't any ashes left, but it's really the crushed up and ground up bones. And so it's not a whole lot different than what the Jews were doing. They just weren't burning the bodies. And so they would take the bones and put them in the ossuary box. And so they would many times put it in then a little niche in the wall of the tomb. And sometimes, just like today, they would inscribe the person's name on the ossuary box, that this is the son of so-and-so. And so all of that was done as part of the Jewish burial rituals. And so they placed Jesus in there. And if there were things that weren't completed, we're told that they brought this with spices where he was crucified, and they laid Jesus there because the day of was close. How much of the spices they used, I don't know. There seems to be others who were also, as we can see, coming to the tomb on the first day of the week in order to prepare the body or to work with the body. And so as we come down into the 20th chapter, it says, the first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, whom Jesus loved, and said unto them, They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him.
Brother
Peter,
Ryan,
yes.
I seen the paper the other day where they already taking bodies and making composers out of them and putting them on the ground for, for fertilizer and stuff.
Yeah.
They already done it in New York or California.
Yeah, there is a place that I've seen where they take the body, and it's, instead of it being burnt, it's freeze dried. All the water is taken out of it, and it's frozen with nitrogen, and then shock waves are sent through it, and it basically just explodes into a bunch of pieces, and then they compress the body into a cube, and they plant seeds in there or tree in there and put it in a green burial area where the body basically becomes the nutrients for the tree that's about to grow. And so it's a new way that people are doing funerals, and they call them green funerals. There's no embalming, there's not a lot of chemicals, all that kind of stuff to have to deal with.
Keep their aisle and stuff like that, though, for people that needs them, before they do stuff like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, again, and they may. I mean, it's like anything else. You can donate whatever you want, and whatever is left, again, has to still be handled. And that would be to varying degrees. I mean, when some people donate organs, they donate everything from, again, the eyes, the heart, the lungs, the liver, all the different things, even at bones. Some will actually even donate bones. Some donate ligaments and tendons. If you ever have an ACL tear and it needs to be repaired, if they can't use yours, they'll get one from a donor that's, again, belonged to somebody else that donated it, and they get it out of that, or a bone bank. They'll get pieces of bone, and there's even skin that is kept for someone who has burn or whatever. So there's a lot of different things. Again, at that time, they weren't doing all of that. But again, upon the first day of the week, and there's a lot of different things that we see, and when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to get the bigger picture. But again, John is talking about something that specifically happened to him. Now, in the writing here that we're reading in John 20, you have to understand this is coming from John's perspective. So let's think for a minute. It's the first day of the week, and Peter and John are in their home, their house, whatever they've got there in the area of Jerusalem, wherever they're staying. And this woman comes banging on your door. And again, this is the experience John has that he writes about. I'm just sitting there with Peter. This woman, somebody's banging on the door. And when they see who it is, it's Mary Magdalene. And, she's all excited, obviously. And again, when they can get the conversation going, she's telling them that, the sepulcher, she went to the sepulcher's open, somebody's taken the body of Jesus, they've took it somewhere else, she doesn't know where it is, she doesn't know what's happened to it. And so she's in this excited state. And since Peter and John were two of the closest disciples, they were part Peter, James, and John, though it doesn't say James were here, but we know that on various occasions Peter, James, and John, which are called the inner three sometimes by theologians. So she comes to Peter, and John is there, and she tells him, I don't know what's happened. And so that's not the kind of news that you want to hear. I mean, you can imagine if, you buried a relative, and then a couple of days, 3 days later, somebody's knocking on your door saying, I went to put flowers on so-and-so's grave, and I got there and the grave's been dug up, and I don't know what's going on. The casket, everything's gone. And so Peter does what we would expect. That's kind of the news that you don't normally hear. And so we're told in verse 3, Peter therefore went forth, and the other disciple, which would be John, and came to the sepulcher. They left the house to see what she's talking about. That's kind of what we're at. It's something that, why would anybody move the body? I mean, what purpose would there be in moving the body? And so we're told that they ran both together. So this is not just a little casual walk. Now, I don't know, like I said, where in Jerusalem they actually were, where they were staying. Jesus was crucified outside the city, and he was on the hill, Golgotha, and it was there somewhere that the tomb, the sepulcher was. And so, they again are in a foot race. I mean, this is a more than just going down the street and making a left kind of thing. And so we're told that they ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter. So they were running together. They left together. They were running together. And the interesting thing is they weren't just running like side by side, but it looks like, they're at a full-blown run because John outrun Peter. And so, they weren't just moving fast, but they were really running, and John outrun Peter. And he came to the sepulcher first. And verse 5 says, he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying, yet went he not in. And, we could go into why he didn't go in, but seeing how he outran Peter, maybe he was just waiting for Peter to catch up. But he doesn't want to go in there and tamper with anything or do anything. He wants, Peter to be able to observe what he has seen. And then we're told, then cometh Simon Peter following him, and we're told he went into the sepulchre and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. Then went in also the other disciple, which first came to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. Now, what he sees and what he believes is not that Jesus is resurrected from the dead. That's not what he's believing. It's like when Mary said they've took the body of Jesus and I don't know what they've done with it. Again, it's just not something that's easy to believe that somebody would, mess with the body, especially over the Passover celebration and all that was associated with it. And so they're taking off. And of course, when John and Peter goes in first, he waits for him. Peter goes in first, and it doesn't necessarily mean he was 5 minutes later. Just Peter got there. He waited on Peter. When Peter got there, Peter went in. John followed him in. That's what it's telling us. It's not like he sat out there for half an hour and then went in. He waited for Peter to get there. And when Peter got there, John said, I've already looked in there. He's not there. And so Peter went on in. And then John went in behind him. And then John, again, seeing and that there was no body there in the tomb, believed what Mary Magdalene had said. And we have a footnote here. It says, for as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Jesus had told them this, but again, it was one of those things that got lost in a greater scheme of things. Some of them didn't really want to believe. And so when it talks about here, it makes it clear, John says, that, they believed what Mary had told them, that somebody, yes, had taken the body and they didn't know what happened to it. And so then the disciples went away unto their own home. And so Peter and John went back to the house that they had there. It's again kind of interesting, wherever they were staying, to their own home. That's an interesting statement, but to their own home, wherever it was that they were staying there in Jerusalem. So we have Mary coming first, and of course we're going to see, again, other writers, but remember, John is dealing with Mary. He's not dealing with all the other Marys and all the other people and whatever else. He's just dealing with the discussion that Mary brought to him and Peter and what happened with him and Peter. These are things that he heard. These are things that he saw. These are not things that he was told. This is what he experienced. Now, all the other stuff is there to be read in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You can read that too. And he's not saying this is the only version, but he's saying this is what happened to me. This is how I found out that the body of Jesus was gone. This is who told me. And so that's the way we have to look at this. This is what he saw and heard. Now, Mary stays behind, and so Peter and John go back to their house, their home, no doubt with the intention of getting in touch with the other disciples, those who were around telling others. And of course, you got a long checklist that has to be going through your mind. Now, that's not necessarily something John wrote about, but you have to think about it. Peter, John, what are we going to do? Well, we need to talk to the disciples. We're making a list here. We're going to have to go see Pilate. We're going to have to get information about the burial detail. Did they come back and take the body? What happened, with that? Why is the body? There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going through your head that they're probably thinking we're going to have to do. We need to tell the other disciples what's happened. We need to find out for ourselves what really happened. We know the end result, but we don't know, how all of this came to pass. So Peter and John's away. They're gone. They're back trying to take care of business, as we might think of it, that needs to be addressed. So again, Mary, that's not really a part of what that's why Mary went to Peter and John to start with. That's something for Peter and John to deal with. So she went and told them and left it to them to deal with. Well, she didn't need to go back with them per se. And so after they leave, we're told that Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre. What else are you going to do? You're there, you're mourning already the loss of Jesus, and she's there. She's just looking in the tomb, can't believe what's happened. She's, for lack of a better term, she's just beside herself with grief. There's the grief of having seen him and been there when he died, and now someone has taken the body. And she has no idea. Nobody knows, at least that she's aware of, what happened to it. And you can see how these graves were designed. She had to stoop down in order to look into the sepulcher. All these workbooks and things that we generally see and use in the Bible study classes, they've got the rock, probably 8 feet, 6 feet, whatever, it's this huge, big rock, stone that's rolled over this tomb. And when we see it open, people are standing up at the entrance to the tomb. There's no reason to, again, spend all that much effort on something that you don't need to do that way. And so rather than making an entrance that you could drive a semi-truck in, and what are you going to do? A couple or 3 people are going to be lifting up a body and taking it in there. And so again, it's always easier to lift it 2 inches off the ground and try to put it on your shoulders. I mean, what are you going to do? So normally the body would have probably been carried in a sheet, what we would think of today as a sheet, or on one of the little briar kind of gurney things that we see. And so there really wasn't a reason to have this gigantic hole. There wasn't a reason for it to be big enough to drive a semi or freight train through. And so again, the holes were low to the ground, and that made it easier to navigate, to move. And so she had to stoop down. That's the point. She had to get down to look into the sepulcher. And so she stoops down and looks in there. And again, we're told that she saw 2 angels in white, the one at the head, the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Yes?
I have one more question before you went to that part of it. It's the Jewish people themselves. When there's people like us go over there to look, they got a door that's got like a 4 by 8 door. This regular-sized door like that right there.
Well, and again, over the years, some of those, for touristy reasons, may have been done that way.
Well, that's money too, I figure now.
You know, at the time, it was just following the customs of the day. Now it's a tourist attraction. And again, chances are it's probably not the tomb that they say is a tomb of Jesus is probably not the tomb. It may be, but you know, we never, you don't know. And of course, he wasn't there that long, so he just at best borrowed it for a little while, let alone made it a tomb. But we have this account that John has, and we must suppose that since John is back with Peter, that this is something that Mary and John discussed. This is something that Mary later, when she catches up with them again, discusses that, while she was gone, she looks in there, sees the 2 men in white. Others say that there was one angel there that spoke to her, and again, it's not a contradiction. There were 2 angels in there. Probably just one of them were speaking. Doesn't make a lot of sense for 2 people to be talking at the same time. And so one of them conveyed what we see here to her, although there were 2 there. And she stooped down and she sees this, and they said unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She said unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Again, she stooped down, may have even been practically on her hands and knees, and she's been looking back in the tomb, and she's talking with the angel, and she's doing that. And while she's talking with an angel, Jesus walks up beside her. The question is, why did she turn around and look? And again, she probably heard or saw the feet of Jesus or the bottom of his garment. And so if somebody is that close to you, what are you going to do? Keep your back turned to them if you don't know who they are? You're going to try to figure out what's going on. It's kind of a scary thing. Somebody's took away the body. You don't know what they've done with it. Now she's talking to angels, or these dressed in white. We suppose them, again, from other writings to understand they are, again, angels. It says 2 angels here sitting in white. And so she turns back and sees Jesus standing there, but she doesn't know who he is. And he said unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will come and take him away. Now, you have to understand, she's had her head literally in a hole in the ground, talking to the men in white, the angels, and she's there with Jesus. And so Jesus asks her, he addresses her. It's interesting, it's kind of interesting the way that this is count, rather than saying Mary first, what are you doing? First he just says, woman, why weepest thou? And so, somebody that you really know, if they call your name, you're going to know. It's a sound that you're familiar with. And so she asked, supposing him to be the one who was in charge of the area, the gardener, the caretaker. And so she makes an offer, just tell me, what happened to him, where they've taken him, where you put him, whatever, and I'll see to it that, he is removed. And Jesus said unto her, Mary. She turned herself and said unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. And so, again, the second time he speaks to her, calls her by name. And when he does that, it's a way in which he's heard him speak before. And so she again turns herself. She still hasn't really had a good view. And she's looked back at his feet and legs and tried to talk with him. But now she turns completely around and looks and beholds and sees that. And she calls him master or teacher. That's a version of the word rabbi. And so Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and to your Father and to my God and your God. And then we're told in verse 18, Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things unto her. One of the questions that comes up quite a bit in verse 17 especially is, why did Jesus why did he ask her not to touch him? And if you actually look at the word touch, it's translated here touch, but it really, a more vivid definition is to cling or to grab. And so Mary is so delighted to see Jesus standing there, literally can't believe her eyes, because they had no real belief that he was going to raise from the dead. And so she just literally grabs a hold of him. And he's telling her, you don't have to do that. I'm not gone yet, is the way that he is going to go away, but not yet. You don't have to cling to me that hard. I'm not, I'm not yet ascended to my Father. I haven't gone back yet. I will be. You need to go tell my disciples that I will be ascending, but again, these things are going on, so he wants them to know. And that's kind of interesting, because Jesus knows what's going on. He is aware of what's going on, and it's kind of interesting that when Peter and John are there, he doesn't make his appearance. He could have just as easily showed up. He could easily have showed up he's going to end up later on, don't want to spoil it, but he's going to come into a room when the doors and windows are locked and just stand in the midst of them. So this new body has some interesting abilities. But he chose, rather than to make himself known to one or two disciples like Peter and John, what we would think of as the apostles, rather than revealing himself directly to them first. He tells them through Mary that he has risen from the dead, and we'll see how he makes a manifestation of himself to the disciples, the apostles. Lord willing, next week. Our time's up. Does anybody have any questions or comments down through verse 18?
How come they don't mention John by name? Just call him
There's lots of different, reasons that people give, and I just don't really have, one reason that, some say that, there was issue with some of the disciples, obviously. We even see Peter, when Jesus was telling him about the things that he would suffer, he asked, what about John? And we see that the answer was that, what difference does it make if he lives till I come back? That's really not your business. And so we're told that from that day forward, there became a rumor that he was not going to die until Jesus come back. And so there were some issues, there were some jealousies with the disciples, and especially the earlier part. And I don't know if it's a fact of humility. Paul speaks of himself not as often as an apostle as he does a servant of Jesus Christ. I mean, he does acknowledge he's an apostle, but he chooses many times to just speak of himself as a servant rather than speaking from a place of authority. It's humble. And so, perhaps John just, he got enough attention when Jesus was on earth. And for whatever reason, he did live, from best we know, outlive all the apostles. And he also was Jesus made him responsible for his mother. And so it's a lot of stuff going on. And so rather than writing from a standpoint of using his name, it's just everybody would probably know who he was talking about anyway. That's the best answer I can give you.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.